It's a long sleeve shirt.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Brandy Worley, and I'm the project coordinator for the Louis A. Berry Institute for Civil Rights and Justice at Southern University Law Center. I'm excited to welcome Jared Evans and Victoria Wegner from Legal Defense Fund to begin our election protection monitoring training. Please give a warm welcome and a round of applause for Jared and Victoria.
Thank y'all so much for having us. It is great to be back. This is actually the 10th year of my 10th anniversary of graduating from SULC. I was a proud graduate in 2012. So it's great to be home. It's great to be back in Baton Rouge. I always have great memories and a really good time. I'm Jared. This is my colleague Tori and our other colleague Sarah. We are all civil rights lawyers, racial justice, voting rights lawyers with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. It's great to be with y'all. Who are we? Everybody can see this?
We can. I was going to ask Brandy if she was recording. We need you guys to use the mic.
Okay.
So that they'll pick it up.
Thank you. This is better?
That's much better.
Okay, awesome. So we work, our partners, our clients, our dearest friends in the state are the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice. We represent the Power Coalition in a number of cases. We were proud to represent them in 2020 to expand early voting during the pandemic. We currently represent the Power Coalition in the congressional case where we're trying to add an additional minority congressional district. That's what Tori and I have spent the majority of the past year working on, trying to get y'all to majority Black congressional seats. But we are sponsoring this and hosting this alongside them, and we're always grateful for Power Coalition. So who are we? The Legal Defense Fund was founded by Thurgood Marshall, the late Supreme Court Justice, the first Black Supreme Court Justice in 1940. As we started off as the legal branch of the NAACP, but in 1940, we became our own separate organization. This is some of our staff at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama earlier this year. I got to see some of you there from the Racial Justice Clinic in Selma. It's an event that we always look forward to commemorate Bloody Sunday. And so what we're going to focus on today is the National Election Protection Network. The network was the Election Protection Network was founded in 2001 after the 2000 election. I'm sure some of you remember Bush v. Gore, how we all felt election night in November 2000, with months and months went on and we didn't know who the president was and everything that happened in Florida. So that's why this whole network was founded. It is a network of lawyers, activists, advocates who focus on election protection. Our single goal is to expand voting access for all people. And again, it is a network of these lawyers, and we are nonpartisan. We don't advocate on behalf of a particular candidate or a particular issue or our party. We're all about expanding voter access for all people. So we're going to go through everything that do a lot of scenario planning and give you a lot of information, but this is the one number that you should remember. If all else fails, if you have an election, you have an issue during early voting, if you have an issue during on election day and the runoff in December, an issue with voter registration with your mail-in ballot, this is the default number to call for all issues. And a trained racial justice, civil rights, voting rights lawyer will pick up. So what have Power Coalition and LDF done together over the past few years? First and foremost, we have visited hundreds of polling sites and done election protection. You see there's a few blank spots that we are working on. We were actually in Rapides and Avoyelles and Evangeline parishes today, try to put some more spots on this map. But as you see, most of our work has been in the urban areas. But we're doing a lot of work this year to make sure that all early voting sites are accessible, that there's proper signage, that there's proper parking, and all other issues. That's pretty much what we focus on. And as thanks to Tori here, this should be hundreds of thousands of nonpartisan voting rights information materials to voters. As you're going to hear today, you'll be very surprised by how much bad information is out there. How many voters in the state don't actually know what the law is, what type of proper ID, what the actual deadlines are to get a mail-in ballot. And so that's why LDF exists. That's why Power Coalition exists, to expand access to the ballot and ensure that the proper information is out there for all voters. We are first and foremost a litigation organization. We're first and foremost, that's our bread and butter is our cases. We, as I mentioned, we represented Power Coalition and expanded early voting. We are also challenging the state House and the state Senate map that were passed. We are trying to add additional minority seats in the House and in the Senate. And as I mentioned, get Louisiana an additional minority congressional district. Our work also involves our advocacy at the Capitol. And this is all related. We take the information that we get from Election Day. We take the data that you, when you go to a poll site and you complete the app or you upload the pictures, we take that data and we decide, and we look at what legislation we can propose to make voting easier. Again, as I mentioned, we expanded early voting access. We've increased the amount of time that you have in the ballot booth to vote. And this is the president of Power Coalition testifying at the Capitol earlier this year on the redistricting maps. So I'm going to briefly give some background on how we got here and what the lay of the land looks like, what your role as a nonpartisan volunteer is. Then we'll do a little practice, little scenario planning. We'll talk about next steps, what to do before, during, and after your shift, both during early voting and on Election Day. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end. But again, this is a smaller group, so please stop us if you're confused about something, and feel free to jump in and ask questions. So the fight for the vote, how did we get here? As most of you in this room know, there has never been a period in the history of this country where Black people did not have to fight for the right to vote. It just never has. This country, as we know it, in my mind, has only existed since 1965, since the passage of the Voting Rights Act. America didn't exist before that for Black people. There was the grandfather clauses that we all know about, the literacy test, the poll taxes. All of that disenfranchised Black people to the point where our vote was, we did not have access to the ballot, essentially. And so the amendments that were passed to the Constitution, starting with the 14th Amendment, all the way up to and through the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Showed y'all a picture earlier where we were on the bridge in Selma earlier this year. The reason why we go to Selma is to commemorate the historic march from Selma to Montgomery and also Bloody Sunday. If it had not been for those warriors, had it not been for those foot soldiers, President Johnson would not have signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It is the most consequential and important piece of legislation, civil rights legislation this country has ever passed. It changed the game for Black people. It changed the game in terms of who was able to vote, who was able to have their vote counted. All of the cases that we brought in court have been under the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The congressional case where we're trying to get additional minority district, the case where we are trying to get additional minority seats in the House of Representatives, all those cases are brought under the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And as I mentioned, forms of voter suppression have evolved. The Voting Rights Act banned grandfather clauses. It banned poll taxes. It banned literacy tests, but it's evolved now. So instead of giving a poll tax, during the pandemic, they wanted you to have a doctor's note to vote by mail. Well, you have to have money to go to the doctor. So that's just another form of a poll tax, right? And other forms of voter suppression that we see are merging precincts in Black neighborhoods. In Iberia Parish, they closed 8 precincts last year. 5 out of those 8 were in Black neighborhoods. A very big issue that we've had recently is changing where people vote and not giving notification. People have voted in certain polling locations for the past 10, 15, 30 years in some cases, and their polling location either gets closed, it gets changed and no notification is sent out. Thanks to our election protection work, we sponsored a bill last year that forced the Secretary of State to post on his website on the website when polling places are changed. So those are kind of all the new forms of voter suppression that we are fighting against, and also especially this year. I'm sure you've seen on the news the unprecedented attacks on poll workers, on election workers, and voter intimidation. And we're going to go through all that in a little bit. So also, what's even more, I'll say troublesome, what's even more unique about this time that we're in, we are dealing with a Supreme Court, the most hostile Supreme Court towards Black and brown bodies in a century, basically. In 2013, the Supreme Court struck down a key provision of the Voting Rights Act, what we call Section 5, pre-clearance. If we still had pre-clearance, we wouldn't even be in court right now. All those discriminatory, racist, unfair, illegal maps would be before the Justice Department for review. Last year, in another case, Brnovich, the Supreme Court again further weakened the Voting Rights Act. Just 2 weeks ago, one of our colleagues argued before the Supreme Court in the Alabama case, Milligan versus Merrill, to again strengthen the Voting Rights Act, and we hope to have a favorable decision sometime this year. But all that to say, we are dealing with again the most hostile Supreme Court towards civil rights, towards racial justice in a century. And as you know, and as we'll go through today, more and more of our rights remain under attack. But we aren't backing down. That's why we are here. That's why Tori and I came down from DC and New York. We're so glad that y'all are here, and hopefully today you will feel better prepared as you go out to do election protection. There are many ways to engage. Okay, I'll turn. Go ahead.
Sure, thanks, Jared. So there are a variety of different ways that you can get involved, and we have some familiar faces in here. So we know you've been fighting in the courts or at the legislature to defend voting rights all year round. But during election season, we want to create a variety of different opportunities for you to weigh in real time to help us collect the data that lets us solve issues before someone is denied their right to vote, before they're improperly turned away from their polling site, or before they just don't realize that, yeah, you can still vote in Louisiana if you don't have an ID, previewing one of our scenarios we'll discuss later on. But what our volunteers are really equipped to do is that real-time data collection for real-time solutions, but also to have an ongoing impact on how we use that data, we use lessons learned to cultivate long-term advocacy goals and to really shift the tides to make this democracy more and more inclusive. So there are a variety of different roles as we've previewed. Traditionally, for election protection, the field work, the real on-the-ground activity beyond those people who are at the hotline answering questions are our poll monitors. So poll monitors are people who are at polling sites who are there to help voters. You're there answering questions, never interested in how someone is voting, who they're voting for, anything partisan or affiliated with one campaign or issue, but really about the process, about making sure that they can exercise their right to vote efficiently and with a welcoming face to help them through the process or answer their questions. Those poll monitors are also there to witness any issues that might come up. Really, really long lines, people being improperly turned away, machines not working well. We know this state has some of, unfortunately, the most outdated machines in the entire country. So any of those issues that could arise, our volunteers are those eyes and ears on the ground who are reporting problems into us, our nonpartisan coalition, so we can work with election officials to really come up with real-time solutions and ongoing policy fixes. During the pandemic, we understood that, volunteers may not be comfortable with or able to directly communicate with voters. We wanted to create an opportunity that provided for the utmost social distancing. And so we created an alternative volunteer opportunity called roving monitoring. The idea here is that you're in your car, you're on your bike, and you're just driving past polling sites, staying at a greater distance and not having as much of that one-to-one contact with voters. What we found though is that our volunteers were so effective. They were able to get to even more polling sites. We visited or received over 600 poll site reports in the November 2020 elections alone because we were able to reach so much geography across the state with this roving program. So we've kept it. It's also a good fit for maybe if you're a little bit more shy and maybe don't want to be talking to voters or standing at a poll site all day. This really helps you contribute in a way that might fit your timelines better or just be more appealing. So those are two different options right there of how you could get involved. We also have dispatch monitors, and these are folks that are most equipped and comfortable to be able to go to the sites where we've gotten reports of something going wrong. Maybe someone called the hotline and said, I've been waiting for 3 hours in this line, it's not moving. We would want to dispatch or reroute one of our volunteers or our most trusted partners to go get more information, to talk to voters, in the kind of worst case scenarios, potentially be collecting information, seeing if people need legal support, and just identifying what is the problem here, and really able to be more agile in where they're going rather than only a few set aside polling sites for the day. Voter outreach volunteers is kind of a new idea that we've adopted this year to make sure that we are creating opportunities for data collection and for know your rights training for the volunteers we know are already out there in the field on or around election day, doing canvassing or other voter outreach, tabling, hosting parties on their campus, or talking to their peers. These voter outreach volunteers are the folks spreading our nonpartisan voting materials, asking people about their experience, not just at polling sites, but in the dorms, in common spaces, at the grocery store. You know, have you voted yet? Go vote. Do you know where your polling site is? Let me help you look up where it is. Maybe it's moved, but I can direct you to the right place to look online to find your polling place. These volunteers are really engaging all over the place and are really ambassadors for voting rights in their community. And finally, we have command center volunteers. That's the crew of us, including ourselves, some of our besties from Power Coalition who are going to be behind screens all day. We're going to be really looking at this data coming in and strategizing about what to do about problems in real time, making calls to election and government officials to cultivate solutions, and really brainstorming what are those ways to make sure election day goes smoothly. All right, so we like to clarify a bit of what we're training on today and what are some of those other roles that we're not here to train on, but are important to know for the who's who at the polling site. So first, in the state of Louisiana, you have poll commissioners. Other states might call these poll workers, election judges. They are the folks hired by the government to administer elections. They are, working in an official capacity inside of a polling site. They're paid for their work, and they are really the front line of our democracy. If it's a role that you're interested in, we would 1,000,000% encourage you to pursue it. You can go on the Secretary of State's website or reach out to your clerk of court to apply. A lot of those trainings have been completed, but it's the type of thing that, especially for a rising generation, we need more poll workers, and especially poll workers that are in and of their communities and are excited about making sure people have access to the ballot in their hometowns. So we're not training for that today, but we certainly support it if it's something that you're interested in pursuing.
They get paid too.
They get paid too. Poll watchers are partisan. So they are appointed by a campaign or a candidate to be inside of polling sites, observing the process, flagging any issues, and they need to be registered with the Secretary of State here. It's a more formalized role. It's contemplated in the election code, and ultimately it's partisan. So that's not the game we're playing here. That's not the role. That's not what we're training on today, but it's important to know if you're asked, oh, are you a poll watcher? You say no. You're a poll monitor, or maybe a roving monitor, a nonpartisan election volunteer. That's what we're training on today. That's how we identify ourselves. Anyone within this broader election protection network, nationally or in Louisiana, is acting when in that role in a nonpartisan capacity. Obviously, we're all individuals. We have our First Amendment rights. You can support whichever candidate you want, work for campaigns, even run for office. It's just when you're in this role, when you've got the shirt on that you'll get from us today or the other swag, you are kind of separating those opinions and really being a welcoming face and advocate for any and all voters, regardless of their political beliefs. box. And you're equipped with information that will be helpful to voters and also insights about what issues could arise so that you're really trained to look out for things that without extra attention, you might not notice as an issue at a polling site. So poll monitoring, that's what we're here to learn today. But if you have interest in these other roles, there's other ways to get engaged. The one thing I'll clarify too for poll monitors is we're typically outside of polling sites. Election code is a little ambiguous about whether or not we should have access indoors, but just to keep things simple and clear in terms of the roles we are or are not playing, our monitors are mainly outside of polling locations rather than in the physical space. All right, so here's your first pop quiz. I feel like I'm back at law school, but instead of those seats, I'm on this side for once. As a volunteer, can you volunteer with other organizations, parties, or campaigns? Yes, no, maybe? Feel free to shout it out.
What'd you say?
Exactly. So it's a little bit murky because the only clarity here is if it's a partisan campaign, not at the same time. So in your own time, absolutely. It's just during your shift when you're wearing, our shirt or posting online, affiliating with nonpartisan work or the Election Protection Network. You're not also going to add, and go vote for X candidate or say those types of things when we're near polling sites. Got to keep it politically neutral in this capacity. But during the rest of your day, when you are a voter in your own capacity or working for other candidates or campaigns, absolutely. It's just we divide that time up separately.
And so, for example, let's say that you want to volunteer from like when the polls open till noon, and you would have on one of our nonpartisan shirts. Everything you're doing at that time is nonpartisan. After that, you can put on whatever kind of campaign shirt you want and do partisan party activities. But as Toria alluded to, they just have to be separate.
Awesome. All right, next one. Can you stay after your shift? I see nodding heads. Absolutely. We would love to have you. If you're able to work with us for 1 minute or one whole day, we appreciate it all. So the other end of this is, can you leave before the end of your shift? Absolutely. You need to go get a snack, pick up the kids, or just, get to your homework, study for some finals or midterms, wherever you're at. We completely understand, but literally any polling site that you visit, any voter that you tell, hey, call 866-OUR-VOTE, they can help you figure out where to vote or answer your other questions. That is all building this movement. That is all helping our democracy pull more people in. So absolutely, you can stay after, but you can also, if you got to do other things, we completely understand. All right, can you vote during your shift?
Yes.
Yes, if you're at your own polling site and you haven't already voted, we are never going to be the people getting in the way of someone casting their ballot. We'd absolutely encourage you to vote early. It's happening right now. We love to celebrate this elongated election season, but certainly if you're at your own polling site, and go right in and cast your ballot and don't miss the opportunity. All right, next up, can you ask someone how they voted or suggest who to vote for? No, exactly. So now I'm hearing the choir. We've got these answers. All right. Can you distribute partisan material or ask voters to sign a petition? No. And on the petition point too, another role to clarify that we're not playing is exit polling. So exit pollsters are people asking like, hey, who did you vote for? Trying to get a sense of how the results are going to end up. We're not doing that. Again, it's something that has more regulation in the election code, and it's not what we're there to do. So whether it's signing a petition or trying to conduct some kind of exit poll, that's not our role. All right, can you challenge a voter's eligibility to vote? No, our work is really geared towards making sure that everyone who is eligible has the opportunity to vote. Other people may be challenging people's ability to vote, their qualification. You may hear from voters that are facing those kinds of challenges. In the most extreme form, they're totally bogus challenges and they're racially targeted. And that's where we as civil rights advocates want to know these things are happening, want to make sure that that voter has the support that they need. Sometimes there's just confusion. Sometimes maybe, someone moved too long ago, they didn't register properly, and they may not be eligible to vote. But we want to watch these patterns and we want to be supportive to voters. We're not there to be challenging one voter or another in their eligibility. Yes, question.
We know that some of these challenges are racially motivated, but in real time, what can a volunteer who is there do to diffuse the situation or to help that person who has been targeted for that kind of challenge from some person who is attempting to intimidate?
Absolutely. So just for folks who are tuning in, the question was, what does a volunteer do in real time if someone has been challenged, especially if it seems to be a racially targeted challenge? So there's a few different options. I would say the best one is probably getting that voter to call 866 our vote and not leave before we've been able to collect more information, get them connected with our volunteer network. The alternative is some of those questions that you would ask them collecting their information. We actually provide a form for you to be able to collect that voter's information and know that it'll get to us just like it would if you called the hotline. That hotline and the forms that we'll talk through that y'all be filling out, it's all coming into our command center. And that command center is staffed by a nonpartisan coalition of civil rights, voting rights advocates that are obsessed with making sure that people in Louisiana are protected in this election system. So know that there's different scenarios there, and we'll get really into kind of the step-by-step of what interacting with voters is going to look like for a scenario like that or a bunch of other ones. Awesome. All right, any other questions? All right, then I have one for you. Can you offer legal advice or establish an attorney-client relationship? I see nodding heads.
Yeah, we can't even do that. Yeah, lawyers, you cannot establish a like attorney-client relationship.
Right, so sometimes there are emergency cases filed on election day, but there are a million different steps, and it's a very specified role for Louisiana barred attorneys and folks way beyond kind of what we're training our individual volunteers to be representing themselves as. So we are, out there providing general know your rights information. It's not construed as legal advice, and we're not trying to establish that relationship. Even if LDF is a legal organization and understood that way, we're playing a different role on election day, and it's really important to not blur those lines. All right, another question.
Just to be clear, I'm a lawyer too, just want to be clear, but I think the thing that bothers me that I'm not clear about is the ability of these people who call themselves poll watchers, who we know are there to obstruct, and they're being able to challenge someone.
Right.
And have that person's vote either be delayed, the count of that person's vote to either be delayed or impeded in some way. I don't understand what allows them to actually do that. When you're saying you can't give anybody legal advice and you can't challenge a voter's eligibility as a volunteer. So how are these people who are not state officials allowed to impede someone else's vote?
Sure. So there's a lot of different layers there. One is that the role that we're training on today, part of these rules are somewhat originated in law, some are best practice, but ultimately the role that we're training on is not contemplated in the election code. But poll watchers, there is a whole section in rule book in Louisiana law about what they're empowered to do, what they're not allowed to do, how they register. In terms of like discrimination, if they are making improper challenges and everything else, that's where our eyes and ears and all of our data collection, talking to voters, being cognizant of these things, triggers, the civil rights community to see if there are ways that we could push back on that. But these rules right here are just for folks that.
I'm trying to turn the camera on, so if you step to the side.
Okay. Uno momento.
Would you continue talking?
Okay. So what we're training on today, these kind of as a volunteer, what can you do, only applies to poll monitors. And it's again, our best practices and the things that we're trying to make sure either y'all are, staying within the boundaries of law or just staying within the boundaries of what we're expecting or not expecting of our volunteers. Poll watchers though, you got it, we're good. Okay, excellent. You're good. Poll watchers have different training, different rules and everything else that applies. Doesn't mean that they get to discriminate without also being, regulated by federal and state protections against discrimination. But that's a whole other lecture that hopefully maybe we could come back for one day. All right, did that answer your question? We can talk more as well. Okay, awesome. One more question. Can you engage in a confrontation with election workers or volunteers from other groups? No, exactly. Sometimes election workers are going to be wrong. They're going to tell a voter, you aren't eligible, or they're just going to have mis or disinformation, maybe be confused. It happens all the time. They're humans. and you might want to correct them or argue with them. You're not there to argue. It's not about confrontation. If there is kind of systematic issues with people providing wrong information, or even just one individual instance of a poll worker giving a voter the wrong information, that's information you want to collect and then tell us so that we can work with election officials at the command center, resolve it, get that voter's information, and make sure that things are handled both in real time, but moving forward. But what we're not asking our volunteers to do is be out there and, getting in disruptions or ever being, shoot away from a polling site or having law enforcement called on them or anything else that could escalate and both put you at risk, but also distract from the voting process. So we're really not asking for any kind of amplified confrontations, but we will talk about, again, what to do if there's poll worker error, also what to do if there's concerted efforts to intimidate. So if it's third parties who are there trying to distract or deter voters from exercising their right to vote, we're going to get into all of that. But again, you're there to really be the welcoming faces, the folks to help people and make the voting experience positive rather than need to get into any kind of confrontation. All right, so let's practice. So it's more quizzes, folks, but we'll give you a little primer on things to look out for. So common issues really vary. These are ones that we see across states. Some appear more in Louisiana, some appear less. So changes to polling locations, it's a big issue right now. You could go on the Secretary of State's website and see the laundry list of locations that have changed, especially in some parishes like St. Landry, Iberia. We've seen this happen really on a mass scale compared to other parishes where maybe only one poll site changed. Confusion about ID requirements is huge. If I've learned one thing in the past couple weeks of doing trainings, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what identification requirements are and are not in the state of Louisiana. Lack of signage or inaccessibility under the rules of the Americans with Disabilities Act or other voting rights protections happens every single election time. Probably the biggest thing that we see is complaints about lack of parking, lack of signage, or inaccessibility issues at polling sites. Long lines, it varies. We saw very, very long lines during early voting in 2020 from Caddo, where we just advocated for a second early voting site to open just because of that, in Jefferson and a variety of other places. During election day, though, we don't see it quite as much. Louisiana luckily has a longer voting day than a lot of other states where we see the worst types of lines, but it can and does happen. Voter intimidation we'll talk about. It's really the last thing that we want to see. It's kind of the worst case scenario for what election protection work can involve. Unfortunately, it's something that we've had to monitor in Louisiana and beyond, and this political climate is not helping whatsoever.
In 2020, right up here in Baker, there was a man with an assault rifle that showed up in tactical gear, basically. He had no business in Baker. He wasn't a voter there. He was just there to intimidate voters, Black voters specifically. It was a majority Black precinct. So unfortunately, there's been an incident in Caddo Parish as well, where we've seen Confederate flags not too far from polling sites. And Bossier, yeah. So unfortunately, those incidents do happen.
In terms of other things, understaffing or undertraining of poll workers. Luckily, Louisiana hasn't suffered quite as many of the poll commissioner shortages as other states, but it's always a big concern. If your staff doesn't show up, who's going to check in voters? Who's going to help them inside? So we really do encourage people to, if you're ever interested in signing up for that job, to consider it, because it's really creating a pipeline of frontline workers for our election system. Electioneering, improper partisan activities, we'll get into that. It's basically campaigning close to a polling site, and there's a really large boundary for how far you're supposed to be away before you can do that in Louisiana. Polls opening or closing early, we'll get into what it means when lines are really long, when it's still late. And then police and law enforcement activity. There's a lot of nuance there about what that could mean and how state law contemplates what police should or shouldn't be doing around election day near polling sites.
And so we'll go into all of these in detail, but there's some confusion sometimes about this last one about voters in line getting turned away at closing time. So polls close in Louisiana at 8 p.m., right? And let's say that you are voting at the mini dome and you pull up at 8 p.m. You missed the deadline, right? If you're in the parking lot at 8 p.m., that doesn't count. If you are actually inside the mini dome, your feet are inside the building and you are in line, even if that line is long, even if it's after 8 o'clock, you are allowed to vote. That's a nuanced distinction there, but you must be in line, not pulling up, not in traffic, not trying to get out of your car. You've got to be physically in line to vote. And even if you don't get to vote till 8:30, even if the lines are long and it's way past 8 p.m., as long as you are in line, you do get to vote.
Awesome. So another quiz, folks. Looking at this image, imagine you are a poll monitor or a roving monitor. You go to a polling site and this is the scene that you see. Does anything stand out as less than ideal, perhaps problematic, maybe not even compliant with law? Anything stick out to you here?
Yeah, what's wrong here?
Lack of signage. Excellent.
Yeah, you can't even tell it's voting going on.
Right.
Yeah, what else?
The different entrance and the accessibility is questionable.
Exactly.
That's putting it nicely.
That's a
yes.
very generous
Yes.
way to put it. The
Yes.
accessibility is very, very, very questionable. In fact, it's just not okay. So we'll start with the good. We'll give a little bit of positive feedback here. Temporary signage is a way to make a polling site that might the rest of the days of the year not be accessible a little bit more accessible. Not well executed here, but the idea of having temporary signage to make parking spaces that aren't otherwise there or accessible parking spaces that aren't otherwise there closest to an entrance. That is one thing that you see demonstrated here, but really doesn't matter when you have a ramp that literally has a pole that's been built through it. No one likely on a walker or wheelchair would be able to get up that ramp to be able to access that door. And one thing you'll see here as well, now that I've moved our image from the way, is that the door there, which has not been well labeled, that you cannot tell is an entrance to a voting site at all, let alone an accessible or an inaccessible entrance, is a door that cannot be opened with a closed fist. So that triggers another requirement. You need to have hardware on a door that allows someone who couldn't be able to twist the doorknob to be able to get in the entrance, or that door is going to need to be propped. So there is a ton of issues here that kind of serve as an entry point for us to talk about accessibility regulations for voting days, and also some of the temporary solutions to make voting sites that, you know, might be a church, may not fall under federal regulations for accessibility other days of the year, accessible on election day, when everything needs to be compliant with accessibility law.
And think about it this way: the voting experience should be inviting. The polling site should be a welcoming experience, right? There should be adequate parking. There should be adequate signage. You shouldn't have to hunt to find where the door is, like there are in some places. You shouldn't have to hunt to find parking. If you are in a wheelchair, you shouldn't have to hunt to find where you can get out of your car at. Yes, yes.
The door is broken down.
Oh, I hope this isn't from experience.
It's from experience, a broken down, heavy to pull. I mean, the door has a handle, but it's even for, you know, someone in good physical capabilities, it's hard to pull on the door.
Sounds like a door that should be propped. So ultimately, there are like set definitions of what accessible hardware on a door is or isn't. We'll get to a slide that includes that. But then there's also just like the overarching idea that a poll site should be welcoming, and we shouldn't have to fight with poll commissioners or election officials to make that happen. So, you know, the gesture of having a door propped can get a little bit hard to advocate for when it's really cold outside for some of these December elections. But y'all have much better weather here than we do up in New York, and a propped door when it's really heavy or otherwise broken down, not accessible, is a solution there to make that fix, or directing people to a more accessible entrance. So that ties into a few things. Accessible parking and pathways are required, but also the marking of those pathways. If an entrance is not accessible, we've been seeing this a lot in our past few days of monitoring early voting sites. If a entrance isn't accessible, there should be directional signage telling people where to go to find the ramp or to find the door that they could actually enter. So really thinking and trying to live in the experience or see through the eyes of people that are trying to navigate a polling site differently than you might, or understanding what people's different experiences are going to be and finding a way into a polling site is part of the work we're trying to gear up our volunteers to do. So if you see a place like this, there's a few important symbols you're seeing on the screen. There's that the signage to indicate where parking spots have been reserved with that universal symbol of accessibility that I hope we all are familiar with. You're also seeing those diagonal lines on the pavement. That's indicating if it's 8 feet that it's van accessible, if it's 5 feet that it's car accessible. Then you're also seeing on the sidewalk there what we call a curb cut. So instead of someone needing to step up onto a sidewalk, there's a way where someone could roll up. So all of those features are things that we're looking for to make sure the path from someone's vehicle, which is hopefully in a reserved spot just for them, has a pathway all the way into the building that is marked as accessible, that is even, it's not all bumpy, it's not a bunch of potholes or rocks or construction going on that gets in the way. It's really making sure that from arriving at a polling site to getting in the door, there's an accessible way to do it. And again, if the building doesn't have features that accommodate that every day of the year, there are temporary fixes. There's cones that can be used to create parking spots that weren't otherwise there or reserve them as accessible. There are temporary ramps that can be installed. There's signage that can say, hey, this is accessible, or to indicate what is an accessible doorway, or an arrow to show where you should go instead.
And you can look at this picture and you can look at this picture and tell it's a very easy fix. That looked like something that came from somebody's backyard, all right, or somebody got off the back of their truck, but they at least tried, right? When you go to these polling sites, and sometimes you can see an effort wasn't even made. At least here they attempted to make it accessible, and that's really all we're looking for is did they even make an attempt for people who can't get upstairs or who can't handle or in a wheelchair are able to access it.
So again, I was talking about that accessible hardware. You're seeing here push doors are ones where, again, you don't require that twisting motion to be able to open the door. Ideally, especially in a lot of school environments, courthouses, you'll even have the button or automatic doors, like at libraries that we've been in, the doors just open, just like the grocery store or something. That's obviously ideal. If that hardware doesn't exist though, doors should be propped. And again, the parking really should be as close as possible to that accessible entrance, and it's got to be well marked.
And even if the doors are accessible, the best practice is to have those doors propped open.
Excellent. So a few other accessibility rights here in Louisiana and beyond to keep in mind, with a quick disclaimer first. I know we're in a school setting, but you don't have to memorize all of this. I know we're doing a few quizzes, but you don't have to ace them all right now or ever. You will have these slides. You will have other cheat sheets, information, fact sheets as a volunteer that you can refer to recollect some of the things we're training on today. Or you can always just direct people to call 866-OUR-VOTE, and they'll have those materials as well to help provide information to voters. So for accessibility rights, you should know under federal law, voters with disabilities or language access needs can bring someone to assist them when voting. That's physically in the booth to help them cast their ballot. There's a few kind of regulations that are under state law. I can't be an employer, union representative. Basically think about who could have improper influence over a voter's ballot, but family members, even you all, if you're not this person's employer or one of those other regulated roles, you could be the one to assist a voter in casting their ballot. I see hands. You first and then you. Yeah. Yes.
Well, we both have probably asking the same question, because a couple of years ago, we took individuals with disabilities to vote.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you for doing that.
Holy hell, trying to assist those people to vote. And they gave Linda, because she was in charge of those individuals, and I went along with her to help her. But we ran into so many problems. Go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, I supervise community homes for people with intellectual disabilities. I registered every last one of them, including probably about 150 others that are on the forensic side of the business. And when I registered them, I noted on the card, there's a question, will you need someone to accommodate you, or there's a question. So I did put yes on the card. And when we got there, they gave us trouble as far as being able to go into the booth with those individuals. I mean, it was like a big deal. Eventually, I think they I don't know if they called a supervisor or
Yeah,
something. They ended up
supervisor.
calling someone, but, you know, it was.
We had to
big
wait a
problem
while.
Right.
Initially, yeah, we had to wait.
But when they called somebody,
Downtown to the voters office to get permission, when the commissioner should have known the rules.
yeah, and that's what we meant by undertrained staff. That's a major
So you're gonna
problem.
run into that.
Yeah,
You know, and also in Louisiana, I've dealt with persons with disabilities because that was my job, would be in employee relations. But the thing of it is that they don't have an appreciation for it. They don't have an understanding of it. That a person with a disability has a right to walk through that door,
Hmm.
whether they walk and stoop and crawl, or whatever that mode of getting around. They have a right to be able to vote without all of these connotations that they're going through. But they're not trained properly.
Right. So a few things that this brings to mind. One is that it's been our real goal this cycle to build more relationships with advocates within the disability community. We'll actually be working with Disability Rights Louisiana on Election Day to specifically assist with calls that are coming into their hotline, or to route some of the calls that we're getting or issues that we're hearing to them and be collaborative. We also, this past legislative session, Power Coalition was truly constructive in having a resolution passed to create a task force with a majority of voters with disabilities seated at that table to look at voting specifically for voters with disabilities, and to make sure that there's a package of bills that comes forward that will improve the administration of elections, with an eye towards how we can make it most inclusive as possible, and also to see if there are administrative fixes or rebudgeting that can be done, better training. So one of the things we've been pushing for is really making sure that voters with disabilities are helping to guide what training should be for poll commissioners, to have more collaboration in some of the public education that we're doing. So all of those things, that task force, I think, meets again on January 9th. I know I've seen some of y'all at the Capitol before. I'm sure it'd be great to hear more testimony on this. But in terms of the immediate response on Election Day, that's where you could call our team or 866, and we would be there to both help you with navigating the pushback that you're getting, also assist those voters, have the conversation with election commissioners. But a lot of this seems like it was confusion about the law, and we can be proactive about getting ahead of that.
Yeah, you know, at one time, the governor's office did have an Office of Disability Affairs.
Yes, they still.
They had individuals, all different perspectives to come in, and those issues were being taken care of. And also the mayor's office because I used to be over the mayor's office commission, disability affairs. Those things are in now. They have gotten too comfortable. You still have to respect people with disabilities, because you never know when it's gonna happen to you.
well, first, thank you both for your work with the disability community. I think out of all the complaints, out of all the issues that we see during election work, discrimination was probably the most frequent one that we see. And to the point that you just made about a variety of disabilities, the task force that Power Coalition created, there are representatives from people with a variety of disabilities, from the intellectually disabled to the hard of hearing to the chronically ill. That task force is composed of a variety of them, and a member of the governor's office is on there as well. So that's who we're working with.
And, Ms. Germany, the governor's office does still have an Office of Disability Affairs.
Yes.
And if they're not providing that kind of service that you need them to provide, I think you should call Ms. Yeah, and I can help get you in touch with the person who runs that Office of Disability Affairs.
Well, I don't think the issue was with the governor's office. It was more with the Secretary of State's office and election workers not being trained with how to advocate for disability, host with
That
disabilities.
needs to be done long term.
Yes, ma'am. I thought you were saying that the Office of Disability Affairs had helped in the past.
See, I can hardly hear you. I can hardly understand you.
So I thought you said that the Office of Disability Affairs had assisted in the past and that they no longer assisted.
No, it's just that they used to have a commission. And the
Okay.
commission dealt with people with all types of disabilities, when there were representatives from people all over the state and local government that would meet periodically to discuss issues, to ensure that people with disabilities would not be discriminated against. Because it is a form of
Yes, of
discrimination.
course, yes.
Yes, it is. It's discrimination. Yes.
So I love this. And one thing that we will come back to at the end is actually how we all kind of stay connected and involved in this work 365 days a year. This is exactly the type of conversation I'd want to bring into that task force, or just bring into framing our policy priorities and framing how we can use these experiences. If we were fully up and running when that instance happened to you, that's the kind of narrative we would be bringing into policy making, into the reports that we're submitting, not only in the state level, but all the way up to the federal level to move solutions. So I hope that we can come back to this. I will kind of go through a few more of the accessibility rights we want to highlight, but then we'll get into even more scenarios. So
Yeah, we're gonna have y'all come testify at the Capitol for that task force.
exactly. Excellent. So people receiving assistance are allowed up to 20 minutes to cast a ballot. And yes, they have a right to receive assistance in the state of Louisiana. Voters are also allowed to request things like a magnifying glass or audio equipment, or to have the machines, the height adjusted so that they can successfully cast their ballot. And then finally, voters in Louisiana, if you have a visible physical disability, or if you have one of those official cards from the state about your disability, you can actually move to the front of the line. And not everyone knows that. So that's a really important accommodation to make clear to people who may be waiting in a very long line but have a disability. All right, next up, we've got a scenario. You might see a familiar person in the image on this slide. But here, let me make sure we can actually see the words. Not sure if it'll work, but I know what it says. A voter says to a poll worker, or says to you that the poll worker, the poll commissioner, told them that they went to the wrong polling location. If you are hearing this from a voter, what might you do? What might you ask next? What's happening here? Think through it, and I'm going to spoil it. So we instruct our volunteers to really ask the questions to get to the core of the issue. Because if a poll commissioner is telling a voter they're at the wrong polling location, the root of that could be a bunch of different things. It could be their own confusion. They might be wrong. The voter may not have checked their registration information at govote.com and their voter portal to confirm that the polling site that they went to is actually where they're supposed to vote. Maybe it's the one closest to work and they thought they're allowed to vote anywhere. Maybe they have been voting there for 20 years, but they've been moved into a new polling location, or whatever else might be going on here. You want to ask questions about the voter, especially ask like, have you checked your registration card? Do you know you're registered? All those types of things you can work on directly with the voter, and we'll provide you the materials and the directions about how to, get to the core of this. Or like all things, you can just direct them to call 866-OUR-VOTE, and those hotline operators will be able to ask them those questions and help give them guidance. One of the potential scenarios here, though, is that the voter moved. In Louisiana, if a voter moved in their same precinct, they can go and vote at their old polling site, but they're going to need to complete an address confirmation card to do that. If they moved within the same parish, same scenario here, they can vote at their old polling place, but they're going to need to fill out that confirmation card. If they moved out of parish, across parish boundaries, that's where it gets a little bit more nuanced. If it was in the last 3 months, the voter can still cast a ballot at their old polling site. The confirmation card, making sure that their address is updated, all still applies. But if it was more than 3 months ago, they needed to have re-registered at their new address before the registration deadlines, which for November 8th have already passed. For December 10th, though, they come up right after the November elections. So we really just want to make sure that people either are updating their address when they go to vote, or are making sure that they're getting properly registered at their new home. All right, another image here. Spot any issues? Yeah, you all saw it. Electioneering, partisan signage, activities, handing out things, wearing shirts, about any party on the ballot, candidate on the ballot, issue on the ballot. All those things can't be worn, handed out, displayed within 600 feet. So 2 football fields, which is huge compared to other states. A lot of other states, it's like 150 feet, maybe 300. Louisiana's got a really big campaign free zone. You can't do any of that stuff within 600 feet. However, private land, that's where these things are allowed. And sometimes as a volunteer, it's hard to tell, is that public land? Is it private? Ultimately, electioneering is not our first priority when we're looking at inaccessibility or long lines, intimidation, whatever else, but we are tracking these things. If there are repeated patterns of electioneering, that's an issue that our volunteers are trained to address by reporting it into us. The other thing with the electioneering boundary is just through experience, especially before the pandemic, where sometimes, even though we are there to be completely politically neutral, we're all nonpartisan, we don't care how people are voting, we're not advocating for one campaign, issue, cause, party, whatever, our volunteers are still sometimes mistaken as having that boundary applied against them and are told to leave, to go away. As we instructed you earlier, we're not telling you to fight with the poll commissioner about that. We ask that you move to the next polling site and just let us know that happened so we can work that out on a more systematic level. But you don't, if you are asked to leave, the law says that if a commissioner, law enforcement tells someone to leave that 600-foot boundary, then just go about your day and let us know it happened to you.
That happened to me in 2019 for the governor's runoff. I was, I don't know if y'all are familiar with where Gus Young is in North Baton Rouge. I was doing poll monitoring all through that neighborhood. I had on my nonpartisan shirt, had on my nonpartisan poll monitor, was not campaigning for any candidate, but I was told to leave because they labeled our activity as partisan.
Exactly. So again, it doesn't need to be an argument or confrontation that you get into, but it is something we want to track because we want to make sure that there's clarity about what we're doing and also that we're able to help voters, especially within that zone where people might have the most questions or face issues. But ultimately, if you're told to leave, just go on to the next site and let us know. All right, another scenario. We're getting through. We're like, I don't know, halfway or something. A voter says that they do not have a photo ID and wants to know if they will be allowed to vote. Can they vote? I'm seeing yeses because y'all were listening at the beginning when I spoiled this. This is the first time because I haven't spoiled it in all the other trainings. Everyone was shaking their head, assuming that it's not allowed. And that's by design. We know that photo ID requirements were passed as a legislative maneuver to try to disenfranchise and confuse voters across the nation after the Supreme Court started to gut the Voting Rights Act. And in Louisiana, there is an identification requirement. You need an ID that has a photo, name, and signature. That could be your license, military ID. However, if a voter does not have that ID on them, with them, or at all, voters can still cast a regular ballot by signature on a voter affidavit. So what that means is they're essentially signing a document that says, I am who I am. It's a legal document that in itself can be intimidating, but it is a mechanism for people to be able to participate if they don't have ID. And that's where that voter outreach work, the education that we're trying to do through our materials is so important, because I promise you there are people that are not going to polling sites, not voting early, not requesting an absentee ballot because they think they just can't because they don't have a driver's license. They do not need one to participate in Louisiana. All right, we're getting close. Spot any issues here? This is a bit of review and some new concepts. Anything? That's right. See, y'all were paying attention this whole time. Accessibility. So we have a voter here who has a visible physical disability. And in Louisiana, that means that she can go to the front of the line. Y'all have been paying attention. We also see here that it's a pretty long line. So she'd probably want to go to the front of the line because it's a longer one. And it seems pretty late at night based on the shadows that you're seeing here. It's late. Jared already gave you the heads up. If someone is in line, these people right here, even if it's 8 p.m., 8:01, polls have just closed, they're standing in line, they have a right to vote, they shouldn't leave. Police presence as well. You might not be able to see that right there in the corner on the side. You can just see that there's an officer with a badge and a vest on the side here. So let's break down each one of these issues. Accessibility, you aced this, all right? You knew the rights that this voter has. A long line. Long lines in and of themselves are an issue. If there's long lines, taking long to vote, may deter some people from sticking around. People might have other things to do, but it's also a symptom of something else. Maybe there are broken machines inside, understaffing, confusion, a really long ballot, which here you're going to have a lot of constitutional amendments, not only in November, but December again. People might not have checked their sample ballot and might be trying to figure them out in real time. So try to get to the core of the issue again. That could be from asking voters, what's going on inside, or it could be from making observations. If no one is coming out of the polling site, it's a complete standstill. Maybe all the machines are broken, maybe something worse is going on. But if it's just kind of a slow trickle of people coming out, sounds like maybe it's more the understaffing or whatever else. What we ask our volunteers to do is make as many observations as possible, so we have the fullest picture of what's going on and can come up with solutions and understand the issue more thoroughly. We also know, if voters are there, they should stay in line. So the other thing that you can do is tell them that. Say, you have a right to vote, stay in line. If you're seeing people leave, if they, they might be rushing home to feed the kids or to get to their shift, whatever it is. If people are leaving, we want to know, why they're being disenfranchised. If it's because they needed a ride earlier in the day, we can help arrange for that. Power Coalition has codes and has ways to help provide rides. And for the December elections, for example, we can make sure that they have a means of getting to a poll site earlier, whatever else it is.
And one of the most important shifts that you can take during this election protection work is the last one, to be there when the polls close. Because a lot of people, if they don't know that if they're in line and they haven't voted at 8 o'clock, they still have a right to vote. So the fact that you are there and you're telling them you can still vote if you were in line, you're helping someone cast a ballot who wouldn't otherwise be able to if you weren't there. So that last shift, typically to us, is probably the most important one.
All right, police presence. You all notice this too. Police presence could be in response to something, and maybe that intimidation or other chaos was happening at the polls. It might also be that, they're just there and they don't realize that on election day, under state law enforcement are not supposed to be at polling sites unless they are called there by a commissioner for some other official reason. So there's actual law about election day. It's a little blurrier for early voting, but on election day, you really shouldn't be seeing officers unless they're voting or they're there for some official reason. They're there for an official reason. That means that there's something else going on. Ultimately, no matter what it is, if you're seeing police at polling sites, that's something that we want our volunteers to be making note of. And ultimately, that brings us to the hardest topic that we have to discuss, which is concerted efforts to intimidate voters on election day. This image is from North Carolina in 2020, in the earlier elections of the year, when there was a whole mass of pickup trucks of men who were at a polling site who were heckling voters. They had all these Confederate flags. They were just there to intimidate and deter. And our National Election Protection Network needed to be responding to this. And unfortunately, we've seen similar displays in this state, in Bossier Parish and other places, in Shreveport, and in worse forms, actual, displays where people had semi-automatic weapons near a polling site there with the intent to deter. If you encounter something like this, your first priority should be your own safety. That's all we ask of you, is to do what you need to do for your own safety and comfort. We would never ask you to stay in a situation where you're not safe, or even you're just generally uncomfortable and want to move along. When you're in a safe place, or if you are comfortable staying and feel like you are not in threat, call our team and make sure we know that this is happening. We're always balancing attention here of when to involve police, and also understanding that police involvement in and of itself can be intimidating to voters, especially communities most targeted by police. But we have a whole system. We have partners who specialize in deterring hate work, who really know all the ins and outs of the best ways to handle situations like this. So it's important to call our team and to report this when you're in a safe place. If you're able to recollect what you saw, or again, are comfortable and safe to stick around, we're going to guide you through what kind of information will be most helpful for our rapid response and our ongoing advocacy. And we're going to do a little bit of a preview on what de-escalation tactics could be, so that bystander intervention and what that looks like. But again, that's not what we're training on today. Ultimately, you are there, you're information gatherers, but you're prioritizing your own safety. And we have other resources to get into what de-escalation could look like if you wanted further training. All right, so important observations fall into three buckets. There's the appearances. What are you seeing? What are people doing? Their actions, how are they coordinating? And then the effects that it's having. For appearances, what are people wearing? Are they carrying weapons? And if so, what kinds? What they're wearing, or if they have flags, are there certain symbols? In the materials that we provide, we actually have tools to be able to identify hate group symbols. I know that unfortunately before January, well, let's set aside what's fortunate and unfortunate. I did not fully understand what a lot of hate groups were or how they identified, what symbols they use, because there's ultimately far too many to keep up with before January 6th. And then after that, I learned a lot about especially white supremacist groups in this country and how they're coordinated. When I went back and I looked at some of the pictures from Louisiana election protection efforts, I started to see more of those symbols in people waiting in line. And so we want to make sure that we are cognizant of what types of groups are around, who they might be targeting, how they're identifying, and those kinds of appearances and observations are really helpful for those amongst our partners who specialize in identifying hate organizations to be able to know what kind of response makes most sense. What are they doing also? There are, state and federal laws that kind of regulate this idea of independent militias. Are they trying to act like they are law enforcement? Are they just standing there and hoping that by staring down voters, they're intimidating? Or are they yelling, harassing, trying to physically obstruct someone getting into a polling site? All of those types of things trigger different protections, are important for us to know in our command center and to be able to communicate with enforcement if needed. Finally, the effects. We want to know if voters are turning away and we want to collect their stories. They might need legal representation eventually. They might need someone to just walk with them to the polling place and feel like they have someone who's there to stand by them. Maybe we need to dispatch more folks to create kind of a physical wall of welcoming faces to make sure that voters feel like they can cast their ballot and be surrounded by supporting folks. So really talking to voters, if you're seeing people who are deterred, is the most helpful of all because they're our priority. Similarly, photos do so much of this work because they let us see at our screens in our command center what's going on. They also help us tell the story, whether it's to the courts, law enforcement, whomever might get involved eventually. But again, this is a comfort level thing. If you don't feel like you can take photos comfortably without triggering some kind of response from them or even at a safe distance, it shouldn't be your top priority, but it is super helpful if you do feel comfortable. And then finally, to reiterate, we do not expect volunteers really to do anything other than prioritize yourselves and certainly not to engage in direct de-escalation unless you really feel like you are comfortable, have the insight to do this and are moved to. But we're only going to have a quick primer and really encourage people to get further training on bystander intervention or de-escalation, if that's something that you would like to do or be equipped to do, not just on election day, but really in any instance where you could see hate activity or people being targeted. The CLARA method is something that's been tried and tested, and it's really about kind of checking in with yourself, making sure that you have the disposition and the comfort and the calmness of mind to even be engaging, because you really need to be, level-headed and calm to be in a situation like this and not escalate any tensions. It's about finding out what people are upset about, why they're doing this, who they're targeting and why. Acknowledging that, though, is not endorsing it or agreeing with it whatsoever. It's just really getting to understand what's happening and then responding and assessing. It's really seeing, should I engage in further de-escalation tactics, which could include things like pulling in other folks to help, delegating who's doing what, speaking to the people who don't appear to be at the helm of all of this, really those enablers who you may be able to better communicate with than someone who is orchestrating or leading these efforts. And then creating distance, really making sure there's space between voters and folks that are there to intimidate. talking to those voters, making sure that they have the support that they need. And then one of kind of the classic trainings on de-escalation or intervention is this idea of interposition. It's literally using your body to create a barrier or to just, make it so that there is distance between those who are intent to intimidate and voters who are just trying to exercise their right to vote. Ultimately, again, this is a training that we could have given this entire 90 minutes. There's a lot of research on this. There's comfort level, there's practice, there's scenario. And we really, really hope it's never something that you have to engage in whatsoever. But if you are interested in it, if you want to learn more, we can absolutely point you in the direction of more resources so that you have this in your repertoire of skills, not just for election day, but all year round. And just know that, there is a whole army of civil rights lawyers that are equipped with understanding about what federal legal protections are, state legal protections are to really address, whether it's through the criminal or the civil system, this idea of intimidation and of non-government actors trying to get in the way of people just exercising their right to vote, because we truly have no time for it. All right, so you're almost ready. We're going to pivot it back to the positive and really get into the nuts and bolts about what comes next with your engagement with us. We're going to talk about before your shift, during your shift, and then after. Before your shift, we need you to sign up to do this work. Just because you're here doesn't mean that you're going to get a shift, get assigned a role. We need to know you really want to do it and which days that you're interested in, which roles you're interested in. We have a mobile app that provides all of this type of information, all the forms we'd ask you to fill out right on your smartphone. You don't have to use it, but we really encourage you to. It makes our lives easier and our volunteers' lives easier. You're going to get more information via email. It's probably going to come from someone named Victoria Wenger at naacpldf.org. That's me. I'm Tori, though. We're all friends now, so you can just call me that, but look out for my email address. Review the materials you get by email, and then, before your shift, prepare. Check the weather before you're out and about, fill your tank of gas, pack some snacks, and bring a buddy if you want. All right, so this is that volunteer form. You can use the QR code to find it. You can also type into your browser. It's going to be case sensitive, bit.ly/L, lowercase a, capital E, P, capital V, O, L.
But the easiest thing is just to pull out your phone.
Yeah,
Take a
QR code
Yeah.
is going to be the easiest way to get there. It's going to come up on a form called Airtable. That's the form software we use for pretty much all of our stuff, so you'll get familiar with it. I will send this out by email, but you are going to save me effort and time if you just go ahead and fill it out. And then also that volunteer app, it might be, the QR codes might be blocked a little bit here, but really all you have to do is go into your app store on your phone, Google Play or the Apple Store, and look for an app called Crowd Compass Events. In Crowd Compass, we have an event, our own app called Prepare to Vote Louisiana. And by downloading that app, you are going to have access to a ton of resources all at your fingertips. But again, if you don't really like technology, don't have a smartphone, we'll make it work for you. And ultimately, if all you're doing is going out and, preaching 866 our vote is a resource to all voters, then you are doing great work for us. All right, remember, review volunteer assignment materials, look out for them from me or from Power Coalition. And then pack for success. Because we're using a mobile app, an extra charger or battery pack is really helpful to have. Also PPE, we have masks and other materials. It's really to your comfort level because we know regulations have changed. We've got t-shirts for you in the back, so we hope that you wear them with pride. And if you don't,
stickers, buttons, all that.
all that kind of stuff. Just when you're wearing our t-shirts or affiliating with this role, whether that's on social media or out in the public, remember, keep it nonpartisan. You're not wearing campaign pins at the same time you're wearing our volunteer t-shirt. All these resources, this slide deck, everything else, we're going to have in that app. I can share by email, but it also can be printed. So if you need different accommodations, you rather have paper forms, we can work with you. But again, we really lean on technology because it makes things efficient. And then finally, remember layers of clothing, comfy shoes, snacks, water, whatever. We've got some of it here. You can take it with you today.
And please go on a full meal. The worst thing you can do is be hungry during election protection.
Worse is hangry,
Yes.
and then you're not nice to voters and you're working
Yes,
against our
please,
cause.
please be full when you go to election protection work.
All right, during your shift, it's a few steps. You're gonna find the assigned polling sites you're working at. When you're there, you're gonna both spot issues and engage with voters if you're in a traditional poll monitoring role. Report any issues to us. Really, you're gonna report what you see at any polling site, even if it's the best polling site you've ever seen in your entire life. We still want you to let us know about it, and then abide by safety best practices. So we'll walk through each of these. Again, the app is really your source for everything. It's where we can, you can find which sites you've been assigned to or are closest to you. It's gonna have a bunch of different materials that'll help you know where to direct voters, govote.com. I hope y'all are familiar with, but we're gonna quick link it. And then the forms that we have you fill out, it's all there in the app. And this is what the app looks like. If you're on its homepage, we've got volunteer instructions. That's really an overview of what we've trained you on today. Polling sites and assignments, again, that's where you find the places we've assigned you to work. Volunteer references, voter info search, we'll break those down. And then ultimately the survey forms that we use to collect information or get that direct contact information for a voter if you're working with them individually. That's all quick linked here with a variety of other things that are pretty straightforward. There are solutions if the app fails. This is all to say technology is imperfect, but you can always call us. You can call 866-OUR-VOTE. You can find these links off of the app. Really, we just make it work. We know that elections are unpredictable. Life is unpredictable. Technology is unpredictable. We just ask for kind of, you know, a flexible attitude among all of our volunteers and know that we're in this together. We will try to implement quick fixes if we can on the app, but we just ask that, you know, folks make it work and let us know if they're seeing anything really bad happening out in the field. All right, so how to find polling sites during your shift. You're gonna get an email with me saying, okay, you're in East Baton Rouge group 1 or something like that. You'll know which group of polling sites you've been assigned to. And with that information, you then go into the app and click on the polling sites and assignments button. There you're gonna find the date of the election. So it'll say like November 8th elections. You'll click on that. You'll be able to find your parish. And then you'll have a button that'll say, you know, East Baton Rouge group 1 or Orleans Parish group 7, whatever you've been told is the name of your group. You'll click on that and it's gonna give you a whole list of polling sites. You click on any of those polling sites, it'll bring you to a page specific for that site. That's got quick links to a map. It's got links to the surveys that we're using. Maybe though, you don't have to click through all this to know the address because you're just gonna plug it into, you know, Google Maps, or you've lived here your whole life and you know where the courthouse is or wherever else a polling site is. But we try to make it really easy for folks with the app, but really just get about from polling site to polling site that you've been assigned, whatever way is easiest for you, and then fill out the checklists that we have provided. So next step, how do you support voters and answer questions during the shift? That's where you go to volunteer references or voter info search. Volunteer references, that's going to include these slides. It'll also have like frequently asked questions, really the same script that folks at 866-OUR-VOTE would use, that same Bill of Rights that you'll see at every polling site, the digital versions of these Know Your Rights materials, all that and more will be linked in the volunteer references as a quick source for you. The voter info search will also take you to the portal, the voter portal here, which is also, again, govote.com. That's another good one to memorize if you can, because that's where voters can look up their registration information, their polling site. If they voted absentee by mail, they can look at the status. They can find their sample ballots. Power Coalition has done an exemplary job of handing out sample ballots in the community, of having them online, but every single voter could go to their own voter portal page and find the sample ballot, which we'd really encourage, especially when you have things like constitutional amendments on the ballot, for people to familiarize themselves with before they get to the polling place. All right, how to report issues. This is like the core of the work. This is where we are really making an ask of you, and you can know that the data that you enter is going to have a tangible effect on policy and rapid response on election day. Poll site checklist. This is where, you know, we had 600 of these submitted in November 2020. I'm trying to get to one for every polling site in this state. I don't know, as soon as possible, but certainly in the coming years, because it gives us a lens into how the state is doing on administering elections, whether sites are accessible or whether they have a lot of improvement that we need to advocate for all year round. So on each poll site page, you can find a quick link, or it was on the homepage too. You can access it through either. It doesn't have to be specific because we're going to ask you to select the polling site you're at once you're actually in the form. It's a separate form. You can access it on the app or separately from the app. We'll provide quick links for it. And that's where you're checking off issues. Were there long lines? Were there accessibility issues? We really ask that you check off the things that are relevant. Most are pretty straightforward, but also take photos. Photos are so helpful in our command center and in our ongoing advocacy to be able to really see what the issues are or see what the prime examples of a great polling site is, so we can use that as a standard to hold other sites up to as well. For photos in Louisiana, again, our volunteers are all outside of polling sites, but even voters, are allowed to take photos inside a polling site. They can even take it of a ballot, but it's not supposed to be completed at all. That kind of helps avoid, if someone was being pressured to vote one way or another, that would be a form of proof. So just know that you shouldn't be seeing people taking photos of an actual completed ballot, but otherwise there is a lot of discretion to take photos around polling sites. Some best practices. It is so helpful to us if you add a little bit of more narrative around what you're seeing. So you can check a box that says long line, but it really helps us do better advocacy to get more machines or more polling locations, more early voting sites. If you are describing that a line is stretching around 4 city blocks, people have been waiting for hours in the hot sun. We've seen multiple people leave. I talked to a voter who had to leave because of childcare. Whatever it is, that kind of nuance really helps us understand. Also know that we'll see some pictures, but we're not getting the full kind of 360-degree view that you have. So when you say there's an issue with an entrance, describing that, okay, the accessible entrance wasn't well labeled and was all the way around the building, and they could have just propped this door, whatever it is, that kind of description when you're asked to expand on the issues you spotted really, really helps our advocacy work. You'll also be asked whether or not something needs urgent attention, so that like intimidation or other things that are super problematic and we really need to have our folks looking at immediately, that would be urgent. Things that do need attention, but maybe aren't kind of the biggest red flag, you would mark as yes, but less time sensitive. So there are fixes that maybe we won't get to on election day because they're so recurring, but we should be looking at in terms of our ongoing advocacy or follow-up letters that we might send. And then hopefully you just say, no, there's no issues because it's a wonderful polling site. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen all the time. If something's really urgent, know that you should also call it in just so that we're not losing it in the midst of all the data that we're getting in. We'll also ask you to rank the site 1 stars to 5 stars, like a hotel or a restaurant. Like, is this a great place? Is it checking off all the boxes on accessibility and kind of a welcoming experience for voters? Or do you have a really kind of broken down, heavy door, no parking, mean commissioners, whatever it is? This helps us sort through everything. Because again, we're getting hundreds of reports and this ranking helps us know, okay, we've got a 1-star polling site. I should look at that right now versus a 5-star helps us, okay, say that we can put some things to the side. It sounds like things are going well there. Voter incident report. This is where you'd be collecting an individual voter's information so we can follow up with them. Maybe they were taken off of the voting rolls and they think it was discriminatory. Maybe it's that, they have some other issue that they've encountered. Maybe they need a ride to the polls and you connected with them in the dorm and they just don't know if they'll be able to get to their polling site without a ride or something like that. You can collect their information here, or you can have them call 866-OUR-VOTE. Either one works. It's going to be the same team seeing it. It's just whether or not you've got time to talk to that voter and they're comfortable giving that information to you, or they'd be more comfortable calling the hotline. Either one works. Important contacts, that's where you're going to find all those hotline links linked, including ones in other languages beyond English as well. We really hope that you just memorize 866-OUR-VOTE. I think that's the only thing I'd ask you to memorize because it's so helpful to just be out in the community telling people about it, not just on election day, but generally. But these will all be quick linked, as well as my contact information and other kind of leads and volunteer support folks that'll be accessible to you throughout the process. All right, safety and best practices. We're almost there. You are almost there.
We're getting close to the end.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so please abide by all local public health guidelines. Luckily, I hope everyone here is vaxxed, is boosted. But again, if you feel comfortable with the mask or any other protective equipment, please use that. Remember your vehicle best practices. This is the absolute worst time to run out of gas, and don't leave anything valuable in the seat that someone could leave unattended. Please watch your surroundings, watch where you park, watch who's parked around you, watch who parks near you. Just be very, very aware of what your situation is, and alert an official if there's an imminent threat. Again, we encourage you to be very careful about how you contact law enforcement. But again, take photos if you can in a safe way. Social media guidelines. Tori and I are both very fortunate to be living our dreams as civil rights lawyers, as racial justice practitioners. But I think for both of us, election protection is the most important work that we get to do. Because when you do this kind of work, you're actually touching democracy. You get to touch someone's enfranchisement. And so we really encourage you to post on social media, to take pictures. That's the best way to recruit more people to do poll monitoring, to do election protection work, is if they see how much fun you're having out there. Again, all of our efforts are nonpartisan. None of this can be done on behalf of a candidate or a party. I know that's tough for some of us. We've got friends and colleagues and classmates who are running for office. But when you do poll monitoring work, you can't post on behalf of anything that's partisan. Every vote counts. The bottom line, if you don't take anything else away from this training today, is that our efforts are all to expand access to the ballot and to ensure that every vote is counted, irrespective of how somebody voted. Please be careful not to spread misinformation. The number one thing that you can do to help protect democracy this election, aside from being a poll monitor, is to report false information when you see it on social media. Don't retweet it, don't reshare it, don't quote tweet it and say, oh, this is awful, because every time you share something, that gives it more publicity, that raises the engagement level. Just report it. Misinformation is rampant. Things like, Black people vote on Wednesday and not Tuesday, or all Democrats are supposed to vote on Wednesday. We've seen stuff like that. Right, we've seen people go in the neighborhoods and say, "Oh, y'all's election day isn't until later on." Report any kind of misinformation that you see on social media. And again, please feel free to post, but don't do anything that gives away your location. So let's say you're doing poll monitoring at the mini dome. We encourage you to not post where your location is until you've left there. LDF and Power Coalition, we have enemies. Not everybody is happy that we do this work. Not everybody is happy that we exist, that we do racial justice work. So anytime you give your location where you are, you're putting yourself and others at risk. So it's fine to post, but just don't post where you currently are. Okay, so what do you do after your shift? Again, if you are at the polling site when the polls close, if someone is in line at 8 p.m., ensure that they're able to vote, but just be aware that the counting process and that it can take a while. Report any efforts to undermine that process. If there are people trying to cause confusion and cause a scene to disturb the voting process, that's the kind of stuff that you report to us. There are all kinds of ways to stay engaged. Go ahead, Tori.
And then keep in touch with us. So quick note on counting every vote. The results on election night, they're not official until everything's certified. And that takes multiple steps and multiple days. It also creates further points of entry for people that want to overthrow election results or to cast doubt upon the integrity of the process. So just know, if you're hearing about these things in your community, you can still report them in, and we ask that you still report them into the hotline or us. Just be cognizant that election time is a season. It's not just a day, and we have to be alert through the whole process to fight back against misinformation about efforts to sabotage or overthrow our democratic principles. So know that you can still reach out to us, not just for that, but really just to stay engaged in general. We already mentioned earlier in the program about the disability voting task force that's happening right now, and that's accepting public comment. We've talked about the efforts that we've all pursued to move forward proactive voting policies in the state of Louisiana. We also do other trainings. We can do a whole voting rights trainings, public comment trainings or workshops with students on campus or with folks in your community. So know that Power Coalition is a resource. You can get involved with them. I know many of you probably already are. They're texting Tuesdays, their phone banks, everything that they do all the time, you can plug into. But also know that LDF is here to support. Power Coalition is one of our dearest partners, but we work with the whole coalition across the state and would be happy to bring even more people into our nonpartisan voting rights efforts and collective all year round. So please do stay in touch. If you're here, you're probably already going to get emails from me. So you'll know how to reach me, Jared, and we just want to be a support system to you. But before we wrap it up, just wanted to open it up to questions if anyone had them. Yes, go ahead.
More about getting involved with the disability task force.
Absolutely. So well, first of all, I can get your information and share it more. Ashley, the president and CEO of Power Coalition, is actually on the task force. We've got other folks from a variety of communities in the governor's office as well who are on the task force. But their next meeting, and don't quote me on this because I don't want to be wrong, but I believe it's January 9th. I don't know if the time has been set. And sometimes it's been published on the legislative website, sometimes it hasn't, but I am tracking it closely. Ashley's going to know exactly when it is because she needs to be there. And what would be great is more public testimony and stories and people feeling like this is a community process to move things forward. Rather,
I'm a person with disabilities, and I have some concerns about being able to vote effectively at the voting pool. Like, I'm from Florida, and I'm voted absentee. I'm not registered here in Louisiana, obviously, but just the thought of going to the polls sometimes gives me anxiety because of
exactly.
Would feel like I need somebody there to kind of help guide me. So.
Absolutely.
That is exactly the kind of story, the kind of testimony that this task force needs to hear. I don't want to throw the Secretary of State under the bus because we still have to work with him, but they want to have this perception that everything is rosy, that there aren't any issues, and that that people with disabilities are able to vote freely and have full access to the ballot as everyone else. That's not the case. So the more that people like you come, have their voice heard, speak up and testify, the better. So we would definitely get your information before we leave here.
Exactly. And the real kind of the point of the task force not only was to make sure that it was composed of voters with disability in the majority themselves and other experts in this field, but also to create more space for people to share their stories and to be the experts on this, to actually drive policy, because you're going to know more about your experience as a voter than I would. So that kind of thought exchange about what would be a better solution is exactly what that can be a platform for. So we can definitely share more information. But if you're interested, like, just know that that kind of story sharing and thought about what can be done better is so incredibly helpful, whether you share it in that form or just send it to us. When that task force dissolves, we're still doing this work 365 days a year for our job. And we want to hear from you and think about if we can do our programming better, if we can advocate for better policy. So just know that's one of many, many ways to stay engaged on that topic or anything voting rights in Louisiana we want to talk about and get y'all involved in. So know that we are a resource for that. Any other questions? Yes.
Question, but one of my clients, I think it was back in February, maybe early. She, well, we received information from her PO that she's no longer under an order of custody. Therefore, the first thing I thought about was, let's get you registered. So we did. I picked her up. We went to the clerk report and we did that. And so she had her ID and everything. So we had, the form filled out. So they said, well, in about a week or so, she'll get her card. Well, about 4 weeks passed, she never got the card. And then 5 weeks and then 6 weeks, she never got the card. So I asked her, I said, well, you sure, maybe somebody picked it up and put it aside and just didn't give it to you or something. She didn't get the card. So I said, let's go back. let's get the ID and let's go back. Let's go to the clerk of court's office and let's see what's going on, because I am determined that everyone else at this home can vote. You're gonna vote too. And so we went back and they said, oh, well, we sent it. And so I asked them for the address because there's a different mailing address rather than the actual home address. And so the card never came. So we asked for some information to validate that she could vote. So we do have something, you know, with the number and it's some other information on it. So I asked him, I said, well, will you send another card? Well, I have you know, it's been maybe 6 weeks again, but you never got a card. So I don't know if the intent was not to give the card in the first place. I mean, I have my feelings about it, but I do know that she can vote. She's on govote.com.
Yeah.
But the card never came.
Yeah.
And that was twice. So I still don't understand why she never got the card.
So a few things in response to that. One, it sounds like you did go to govote.com and people can find a digital version of their registration through that portal, but should be getting a physical card. So for that, even just sharing, like calling that story into 866 our vote, even if just to say like, this has been resolved, but I want you to know, helps us identify if there are patterns. One thing that LDF had to litigate in 2020 is a lawsuit against the United States Postal Service because of delays. If there are other patterns, or if it seems like a pattern from one specific parish or another, where the registrar is not sending something else, or there's something going on, the more data points we have, the more we understand if something's happening systematically. The other concern with mail is even if she can confirm her registration on govote.com for other types of mailings, if people are sending confirmations after a voter hasn't been voting for many, many cycles, that could potentially lead to someone being removed from the polls. So we want to make sure that addresses are correct, that mail is getting to people. And that story collection, again, helps us not only help a voter on an individual level. Again, it sounds like you actually did that work. You went to go vote. You really took the advice before we would have given it about how to confirm that person's registration. But even just knowing there was an issue, even if it's resolved, is helpful for us to track things, to be able to follow up and also investigate a bit more. This is not the only instance.
Any other questions? All right, well, we're going to close with one of our favorite quotes from our founder, Thurgood Marshall. This is your democracy, make it, protect it, pass it on. When you do election protection work, you are doing the actual work of democracy. Democracy is an act. And so again, as I said earlier, you know, if you are helping someone vote who wouldn't otherwise be able to, you're touching democracy in your hand. So again, we got food for y'all. There's t-shirts in the back. We also have drinks, but we hope to see you out there at the polls on election day.
And please take as many of these information cards as you're willing to hand out in your community, bring to your library, wherever else. I want to see that all those stacks gone so they can actually get in the hands of voters. But thank you so much, Brandy, too, for all of your work to coordinate this.
Thank you, Jared and Victoria, for your presentation. Thank you, everyone, for coming out to our election monitoring training program and for joining the online Zoom. If you are in person, please enjoy refreshments provided by LDF and the Power Coalition in the faculty lounge. And thank you all and have a good evening.
If people want to sign up. Thanks so much for coming.